I didn't mean to notice the way his hand rested on the arm of the couch. I didn't mean to trace the shape of his knuckles with my eyes, or count the seconds between his breaths. But I did. The television murmured in front of us, some documentary neither of us was watching. The volume was low enough that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint tick of the clock on the mantel. My wife had left that morning for her sister's place upstate. The house felt different without her. Quieter, emptier, or maybe just more honest. Elias sat beside me the way he always had. Close, but not too close. Our knees almost touched. Almost. There was a glass of wine on the coffee table in front of him, condensation pooling at its base, untouched for the last 20 minutes. Mine sat beside it, half empty. I couldn't remember drinking it. We'd known each other since college. More than 20 years. Long enough that silence didn't feel awkward between us. Long enough that I should have been comfortable. But I wasn't. Not tonight. He shifted slightly, adjusting his weight, and his shoulder brushed mine. Just for a second. Just enough that I felt the warmth of him through my shirt. My chest tightened. I kept my eyes on the television. I'd spent the entire day teaching teenagers about World War II, watching them stare at their phones under their desks, pretending I didn't notice. I was tired. Elias had come straight from the hospital, still wearing his scrubs under his jacket. He was tired too. We had every reason to sit here like this, doing nothing, saying nothing. But something was different tonight. Something had shifted. Or maybe it had been shifting for years, so slowly I hadn't noticed until now. His hand moved. Not toward me. Just a small adjustment, his fingers spreading slightly against the cushion. I watched them from the corner of my eye. I thought about what it would feel like if those fingers touched mine. If they closed around them. If they didn't let go. I forced myself to look away. To focus on the screen. On the narrator's voice explaining troop movements, supply lines, things that didn't matter. Things that felt safer than whatever was happening in the inches between us. Elias said my name. Quietly. Nathaniel. Just that. Nothing more. I turned my head. Our faces were closer than I expected. Close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. I should have pulled back. Should have laughed it off, stood up, asked if he wanted another drink. Should have done anything except sit there, frozen, feeling my pulse hammer in my throat. He didn't say anything else. Neither did I. We just stayed like that, the documentary droning on, the wine sweating on the table, the house holding its breath around us. I thought about my wife, about the ring on my finger, about my children asleep upstairs, about the life I had built, brick by brick, year by year, into something solid and respectable and safe. And then I thought about the way Elias looked at me sometimes. The way he listened when I spoke, like my words actually mattered. The way his presence made me feel less alone in a way I couldn't explain. In a way I'd been afraid to examine too closely. His hand moved again, this time toward me. Just an inch. Maybe less. But I felt it like an earthquake. I didn't move away. I should have. But I didn't. The silence stretched. The television kept talking. The clock kept ticking. And everything I thought I knew about myself began to crack. I wake up every morning at 6:15. The alarm goes off, and I reach across the bed to silence it before it wakes Marissa. She stirs anyway, pulls the covers higher, turns away from me. I sit on the edge of the mattress for a moment, my feet on the cold hardwood floor, and I try to remember what it felt like to want to stay in bed with her. The coffee maker is programmed to start at 6:10. By the time I get downstairs, the pot is half full, and the kitchen smells like something warm and familiar. I pour it into the same chipped mug I've used for 8 years. There's a crack running down one side that Marissa keeps saying she'll replace, but she never does. Neither do I. Our house sits at the end of a quiet street lined with maples. In the fall, the leaves turn gold and cover the lawn, and I spend weekends raking them into piles that the kids used to jump in. They don't do that anymore. They're too old now. 16 and 14. They move through the house like ghosts, headphones in, doors closed. I used to know what they were thinking. I used to be able to make them laugh. Marissa comes down around 7. She's already dressed, her hair pulled back, her face arranged into the expression she wears when she's thinking about her day instead of mine. She pours her own coffee. We stand on opposite sides of the kitchen island. She asks if I remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. I tell her yes. She reminds me about the parent-teacher conference on Thursday. I tell her I marked it on the calendar. She nods. We've been married for 18 years. These are the conversations we have now. I teach history at the high school 2 towns over. American history, world history, the occasional elective on military conflicts that only the kids who watch too many war movies sign up for. I've been doing it for nearly 20 years. The classroom is the same every year. The same posters on the walls. The same broken projector I have to jiggle to get working. The same rows of desks where teenagers sit and pretend to care about the past while they text about their present. I used to love it. I used to think I was shaping minds, making a difference. Now I just go through the motions. I write dates on the board. I hand out worksheets. I collect essays I don't have the energy to read carefully anymore. The house is full of photographs. Marissa likes to print them out and frame them, arrange them on shelves and walls like evidence of a happy life. There's one from our wedding day, both of us younger and smiling like we believed in something. There's one from a beach vacation 5 years ago, all 4 of us squinting into the sun, our arms around each other in a pose that felt forced even then. There's one from last Christmas, everyone gathered around the tree, the flash making our eyes look hollow. I walk past them every day. I don't look at them anymore. Marissa and I used to talk, really talk, late into the night, about everything and nothing, about our dreams, our fears, the people we wanted to become. I can't remember when that stopped. It happened so gradually I didn't notice until the silence had already settled in, thick and permanent. Now we talk about bills, about the mortgage payment, about whether we need a new water heater, about whose turn it is to take the car in for an oil change. Practical things, safe things, things that don't require us to look at each other too closely. At night, we lie next to each other in bed, the space between us measured in inches that feel like miles. She reads on her tablet. I stare at the ceiling. Sometimes her hand brushes mine by accident, and we both pull away, like we've touched something hot. I wonder if she feels it too. The emptiness. The sense that we're performing a marriage instead of living one. I wonder if she lies awake after I've fallen asleep and thinks about leaving. I wonder if she stays for the same reasons I do. The kids. The house. The fear of what people would say. Elias has been in my life longer than Marissa has. We met in college, freshman year, assigned as roommates in a cramped dorm that smelled like mildew and burnt popcorn. He was studying pre-med. I was undecided. We stayed up late talking about books, about music, about the future stretching out in front of us like an open road. He was the first person who made me feel like I didn't have to pretend, like I could say what I really thought, admit what I really felt, and he wouldn't turn away. We were just friends. That's what I told myself. That's what I believed. After college, we stayed close. We were in each other's weddings. We called on birthdays. When he got divorced 3 years ago, I was the first person he told. He sat in my living room, his voice quiet and raw, and said he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep pretending he was happy when he wasn't. I didn't know what to say. I just listened. He lives alone now, in a modest apartment across town. The furniture is secondhand, the walls are bare, but it feels more like a home than my house does. When I visit, we fall into the same rhythms we had in college. We cook simple meals together. We open a bottle of wine. We sit on his couch and talk until the hours blur together. The couch. It's old, probably older than his marriage was. Brown leather, worn soft in the places where bodies have pressed into it over the years. When I sit next to him there, I feel something I can't name. Something I've been trying not to name for longer than I want to admit. Marissa doesn't ask about Elias much. She knows we're close. She's met him at barbecues, at holiday parties, at the occasional dinner where we all sit around pretending we're comfortable. She doesn't see what I see. The way he listens. The way his eyes find mine across a room. The way he laughs at things only I would find funny. Or maybe she does see it. Maybe that's why she doesn't ask. I've built a life that looks right from the outside. The house. The job. The family. I mow the lawn on Saturdays. I coach my son's baseball team, or I used to before he quit. I show up to school events and stand with the other parents. making small talk about college applications and weekend plans. But inside, I feel like I'm suffocating. Like I'm wearing a costume that used to fit but doesn't anymore. Like every day I'm choosing to be someone I'm not, and I don't know how to stop. At night, when everyone is asleep, I sit on the couch in the living room. The same couch where Elias sat beside me, where his hand almost touched mine, where everything I've been holding back for decades started to crack open. I sit there in the dark and I let myself imagine a different life. One where I didn't spend so much time pretending. One where I could reach out and touch what I wanted without fear. One where the person sitting next to me made me feel alive instead of empty. The house is silent around me. The refrigerator hums. The clock ticks. And I sit there, alone, wondering how much longer I can keep living like this. Marissa told me about the trip on a Tuesday. She was standing at the sink, rinsing dishes, her back to me. Her sister needed her, she said. Some problem with the house. Or maybe it was something else. I wasn't really listening. I was watching the way her shoulders moved, mechanical and distant, and thinking about how long it had been since she'd asked me to come with her anywhere. She'd be gone a week. Maybe longer. She turned to look at me then, waiting for a reaction. I nodded. I said that was fine. I said I hoped everything worked out. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and went back to the dishes. The kids would stay with me. That was the plan. But then my son got invited to some camping trip with his friend's family, and my daughter decided she'd rather stay at her best friend's house, where there were no parents asking questions. By Thursday, it was settled. I'd have the house to myself. I should have felt relieved. A week of silence. A week without having to perform. But instead, I felt the emptiness of it pressing down on me, heavy and cold. I called Elias that night. I didn't plan to. I was sitting on the couch, the television on but muted, and I picked up my phone before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring. His voice was tired but warm. I asked him what he was doing. He said nothing much. I asked if he wanted to come over for dinner sometime that week. There was a pause. Then he said yes. Marissa left on Saturday morning. She packed her bag the night before, folding clothes with the same careful precision she brought to everything. I stood in the doorway and watched her. She asked if I needed anything from her sister's town. I said no. She kissed me on the cheek, brief and obligatory, and told me to call if anything came up. I promised I would. The house felt different after she left. Bigger, quieter. I walked through the rooms and noticed things I hadn't seen in years. The way the light came through the kitchen window in the afternoon. The creak of the floorboards in the hallway. The sound of my own breathing. Elias came over on Sunday. I cooked, or tried to. Pasta with vegetables, something simple that I couldn't mess up too badly. He brought wine, a bottle of red that he said he'd been saving. We opened it while the water boiled, standing in the kitchen, talking about work. He told me about a patient who'd coded twice and somehow pulled through. I told him about a kid in my third period class who'd turned in an essay on the Vietnam War that was just copied from Wikipedia, word for word. We laughed. It felt good to laugh. It felt like something I hadn't done in a long time. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where my family sat in silence most nights. But with Elias, it was different. We talked about everything. About his ex-wife, who'd started dating someone new. About my daughter, who barely spoke to me anymore. About a movie we both wanted to see but hadn't made time for. About nothing and everything. After dinner, we moved to the couch. It felt natural, inevitable. We'd done this 100 times before. But tonight, something was different. The house was empty. There was no one to interrupt us, no one to walk in and ask what we were doing. It was just us. He sat closer than usual. Not enough that it was obvious, but enough that I noticed. Our knees touched. I didn't move away. We put on a movie, some thriller neither of us had seen. I couldn't tell you what it was about. I wasn't watching. I was too aware of him beside me. The warmth of his body. The way he shifted his weight and his shoulder pressed against mine. The way he laughed at something on screen and I felt the vibration of it. I poured more wine. We were both drinking too much, but I didn't care. It made everything feel softer, easier. It made it easier to ignore the voice in my head telling me to pull away. He stayed late. Later than he usually did. We talked through the end of the movie and into the silence after. At some point, he asked if I was okay. Really okay. I didn't know how to answer that. I stared at my hands, at the wine glass I'd been turning in circles on my knee, and I said I didn't know. He didn't push. He just sat there, waiting. And then he said that he was here if I needed him. That he always had been. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the lines around his eyes, the gray starting to show at his temples, the way he was watching me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. And I felt something crack open inside my chest. He left around midnight. I walked him to the door. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. He said he'd come back tomorrow if I wanted. I said I did. He smiled, small and soft, and then he was gone. I went back to the couch and sat in the spot where he'd been. It was still warm. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it. Let myself admit, just for a moment, what I'd been denying for so long. He came back on Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday. We fell into a routine. He'd arrive in the evening after his shift, still in his scrubs, his hair messy and his eyes tired. I'd have dinner waiting, or we'd cook together, chopping vegetables side by side in the kitchen. We'd eat. We'd talk. We'd end up on the couch. Every night, he sat a little closer. Every night, the space between us shrank. On Wednesday, we opened another bottle of wine. We were halfway through it when the storm started. Rain pounded against the windows, loud and relentless. Thunder rolled through the house, rattling the frames on the walls. And then the lights went out. We sat in the sudden darkness, both of us laughing at the timing of it. I found candles in the kitchen drawer, the ones Marissa kept for emergencies. I lit them and placed them around the living room. The light was soft and flickering, casting shadows that moved across the walls. We went back to the couch. The storm raged outside, but inside it felt quiet, intimate, like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us and the candlelight between us. He was closer now, close enough that I could see the way the light caught in his eyes, close enough that when he breathed, I felt it. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. Everything we'd been avoiding, everything we'd been holding back, hung in the air between us like something tangible. His hand rested on the cushion between us. I stared at his fingers, long and steady. I thought about reaching for them, about closing the distance, about what would happen if I did. I didn't move, but I didn't move away either. The candles burned lower. The storm outside grew louder. And we sat there, side by side, on the edge of something I couldn't name but could no longer deny. He said my name again. Nathaniel. Soft and low, almost a whisper. I turned to look at him. Our faces were inches apart. I could see every detail. The slight part of his lips. The way his eyes searched mine, asking a question he didn't have to speak. The rain hammered against the roof. The candlelight flickered. And for the first time in my life, I stopped running from what I wanted. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I was ready. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Not here. Not with him. Not anymore. The morning after the storm, I woke up on the couch. Elias was still there, asleep beside me, his head tilted back against the cushions. The candles had burned out hours ago. Gray light filtered through the windows, weak and uncertain. I watched him for a long time. The rise and fall of his chest. The way his hand rested on his stomach, relaxed and open. I wondered when I'd fallen asleep. I wondered what it meant that I'd let myself. He stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw me watching him, he smiled. Not the careful smile he usually wore, but something softer, something unguarded. He asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure it was true. We didn't talk about what had almost happened the night before. We made coffee in silence, moved around the kitchen in a dance we'd perfected over the years. But everything felt different now. Every glance carried weight. Every accidental touch sent electricity through me. He left after breakfast to go home and change for his shift. I stood at the door and watched him walk to his car. Before he got in, he turned back and looked at me. He said he'd come back tonight if I wanted. I said I did. I always did. After he left, I stood in the empty house and tried to understand what was happening to me. I was 46 years old. I'd been married for 18 years. I had children, a mortgage, a life that made sense on paper. And yet here I was, feeling like a teenager again, counting the hours until I could see him. I thought about college, about the late nights in our dorm room, talking until dawn. About the time he drove 4 hours to visit me after my father died, just to sit with me in silence. About his wedding day, when I stood beside him as his best man and felt something twist inside me that I refused to name. I'd spent half my life convincing myself that what I felt was friendship. Just friendship. Deep and important and rare, but nothing more. I'd buried everything else so deep I'd almost believed it myself. But I couldn't bury it anymore. That night, Elias came back. We cooked together, something more ambitious this time. He chopped onions while I seasoned chicken. We moved around each other with an ease that felt almost domestic. He told me about his day, about a surgery that had gone well, about a nurse who'd made him laugh. I told him about the stack of essays I still hadn't graded, about the email from the principal about budget cuts. Normal things. Safe things. But underneath it all was the current of something unspoken. We ate dinner at the table. The wine bottle sat between us, half empty by the time we finished. He asked me about Marissa, when she was coming back, how things were between us. I didn't know how to answer. I stared at my plate and said they were fine. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. He asked if I was happy. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unavoidable. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes, to protect the fiction I'd been maintaining for years. But I couldn't. Not to him. I said I didn't know what happy felt like anymore. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. Just that. Nothing more. But I felt it everywhere. We moved to the couch after dinner. It had become our place. The spot where everything felt possible. Where the distance between who I was and who I wanted to be felt crossable. We put on another movie. I don't remember what. We weren't watching it anyway. We were talking instead, the kind of deep, wandering conversation we used to have in college. About life, about choices, about the people we'd become, and whether they were the people we'd meant to be. He told me about his divorce. Not the surface story everyone knew, but the real one. How he'd realized he was living a lie. How he'd married his ex-wife because it was what he was supposed to do, what everyone expected, but he'd never been fully present. Never fully himself. He said leaving her was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the only honest thing. I listened, and I heard my own life in his words. He said that after the divorce, he'd promised himself he wouldn't pretend anymore, that he'd live honestly, even if it was harder, even if it meant being alone. But he wasn't alone. He was here, with me. I asked him if he regretted it. The divorce. Starting over. He shook his head. He said the only thing he regretted was not doing it sooner. Not giving himself permission to want what he wanted. I understood what he was really saying. What he was offering me. Permission. Understanding. A way forward. I told him I was scared. The words came out before I could stop them. Scared of what it would mean. Scared of what I'd lose. Scared of who I'd have to become. He moved closer. Our knees were touching now. Our shoulders pressed together. He said he was scared too. But that being scared didn't mean it wasn't real. Didn't mean it wasn't right. The movie played on, forgotten. The room had grown dark around us, lit only by the lamp in the corner. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent. I turned to look at him. His face was so close I could count his eyelashes. I could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the slight curve of his mouth. I thought about all the years I'd known him, all the moments I'd pushed aside, all the feelings I'd refused to acknowledge. I thought about the night we met, two 18-year-olds thrown together by chance. About the morning he got married, and I felt like I was losing something I'd never had. About every phone call, every visit, every time he made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. I thought about my wife sleeping in a house 2 hours away. About my children who barely knew me anymore. About the life I'd built that felt like a prison. And I thought about this. About him. About the way he looked at me like I mattered. Like I was enough. Like I was seen. I told him about the first time I realized I loved him. It was sophomore year. We were studying for finals in the library, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups. He'd fallen asleep with his head on the table, his hand still holding a highlighter. I'd watched him sleep and felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and terrifying. I'd gotten up and left. I'd spent the rest of the semester avoiding being alone with him, but I'd never stopped feeling it. He was quiet for a long time after I said it. Then he told me he'd known. Not then, maybe, but later. He said he'd seen it in the way I looked at him sometimes, in the way I found excuses to be near him. He'd seen it, and he'd waited. For years, he'd waited. I asked him why he never said anything. Why he let me marry someone else. Why he got married himself. He said he'd been scared too. Scared of ruining our friendship. Scared of what it would mean to admit what he felt. Scared I didn't feel the same way. So he'd buried it, just like I had. He'd tried to move on, to build a normal life. But it had never worked. Because it had always been me. The words settled between us, true and irreversible. I don't know who moved first. Maybe both of us. Maybe neither. But suddenly the space between us was gone and his hand was on my face, and I was leaning into him like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment. Our foreheads touched. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. I felt his hand trembling against my cheek. Or maybe it was me trembling. I couldn't tell any more where I ended and he began. I whispered his name. Just that. Just his name. And it was enough. We stayed on that couch until the early hours of the morning, wrapped around each other, talking and not talking, holding on like we were afraid to let go. Like if we did, the world would rush back in and tear us apart. The lamp burned in the corner. The house was silent. And for the first time and longer than I could remember, I felt like I could breathe. When the first light of dawn started to filter through the windows, he asked me what happened next. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to reconcile this with everything else. With my marriage. With my children. With the life I'd built on a foundation of denial. But I knew I couldn't go back. Couldn't unknow what I knew now. Couldn't unfeel what I felt. I told him I needed time. Time to think. Time to figure out what this meant and what I was willing to risk for it. He nodded. He understood. He said he'd wait. However long it took. He'd already waited 20 years. He could wait a little longer. He left as the sun came up. I watched him drive away, and then I sat alone on the couch, in the spot where we'd been, and I let myself fall apart. Marissa came home on a Friday afternoon. I heard her car pull into the driveway and felt my chest tighten. I'd spent the last 2 days cleaning the house, erasing any trace of Elias. Not that there was much to erase. A second wine glass in the dish rack. An indentation on the couch cushion. The faint smell of his cologne that seemed to linger in the air. She came through the door with her suitcase, looking tired but lighter somehow. She said the trip was good, that her sister was doing better, that she'd missed home. She kissed me on the cheek, the same brief obligatory kiss she always gave, and went upstairs to unpack. I stood in the entryway and felt like a stranger in my own house. That night, we had dinner together. Just the two of us. The kids were still gone, wouldn't be back until Sunday. We sat across from each other at the table, the same table where I'd sat with Elias just days before. We talked about her trip, about her sister's house, about the weather. Safe, surface things that meant nothing. I watched her as she talked. Really watched her. She was still beautiful, in the same way she'd been beautiful when we met. But I felt nothing. No pull. No desire. Just a kind of distant fondness, like looking at a photograph of someone I used to know. She asked me how my week had been. I said it was fine. Quiet. I'd gotten some grading done. I'd watched some movies. The lies came easily. Too easily. I'd been practicing them for years. She nodded, already thinking about something else. She didn't ask what movies. She didn't ask if I'd been lonely. She didn't really want to know. After dinner, we moved to the living room. She turned on the television and settled into her usual spot on the couch. I sat in the chair across from her. I couldn't sit next to her. Not on that couch. Not after everything. She didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't say anything. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay next to her in bed, listening to her breathe, and felt the weight of my double life pressing down on me. I thought about Elias, alone in his apartment. I thought about the feeling of his hand on my face. I thought about everything I'd said to him and everything I'd felt. And then I thought about what I was doing here, in this bed, pretending nothing had changed. I got up and went downstairs. I sat on the couch in the dark and stared at nothing. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock, each second measuring the distance between who I was pretending to be and who I actually was. I started writing that night. I found an old notebook in the drawer of my desk, one I'd bought years ago with the intention of journaling, but had never used. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and I wrote. I wrote about Elias, about the night of the storm, about the years of denial, about the feeling of finally being honest with someone, with myself. The words poured out of me, raw and unfiltered, things I could never say out loud, things I'd never admitted even in my own head. I wrote, I have loved him for half my life. I have spent 20 years pretending I didn't. I have built an entire existence around the lie that I could be happy this way, that I could be the person everyone needed me to be. But I can't anymore. I can't keep pretending. I wrote, I don't know who I am without the pretense. I've been performing for so long I've forgotten what's real. But when I'm with him, I remember. When I'm with him, I feel like myself. I wrote, I am 46 years old, and I have never been fully alive. Not until now. I hid the notebook in the back of my desk drawer, behind files and old lesson plans where Marissa would never find it. But I kept writing. Every night after she went to bed, I'd go back to it, filling page after page with truths I couldn't speak. The days blurred together. I went through the motions. I woke up. I made coffee. I went to work. I came home. I sat at the dinner table with Marissa and the kids and made small talk. I watched television. I went to bed. But inside, I was screaming. Elias called a few times. Brief conversations, careful and coded. He asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. He didn't believe me. He asked if we could meet. I said I needed more time. He said he understood, but I could hear the hurt in his voice. The uncertainty. He was waiting, like he'd promised. But I could feel him slipping away with every day I didn't choose him. Marissa noticed something was wrong. She asked me one evening if I was feeling okay, if something had happened. We were in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. She was drying a plate, her movements automatic and practiced. I stood at the sink with my hands in the soapy water, and I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say everything. That I'd been lying to her for 18 years. That I'd married her knowing I could never love her the way she deserved. That I'd been in love with someone else the entire time. But I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, heavy and impossible. I said I was just tired. Work stress. Nothing important. She looked at me for a long moment. Really looked at me. And I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Not anger or suspicion, but sadness. Like she already knew. Like she'd always known and had been waiting for me to say it. She put down the dish and walked away. She didn't say anything else. But her silence felt like an accusation. That night, I wrote, she knows. Or if she doesn't know, she suspects. And I think part of her has suspected for years. We've been living parallel lives, both of us pretending, both of us too scared to break the illusion. I wrote, I'm not sure which is worse, that I've lied to her, or that she's let me. The next day, I called Elias. I told him I needed to see him. He said when. I said now. We met at his apartment. I drove there in a daze, barely aware of the roads, the traffic, the world around me. When he opened the door, I saw the hope in his eyes and the fear underneath it. We sat on his couch, the old brown leather one that had become our place. But it felt different here, in his space. More real, more dangerous. He asked me what I'd decided. I told him I didn't know. I told him I was drowning, that I couldn't keep living the way I had been, but I didn't know how to live any other way. He took my hand. He said I didn't have to figure it all out right now, that he wasn't asking me to leave my family tomorrow, that he just wanted to know if this was real for me, if what we had was worth fighting for. I looked at him, at this man who'd been part of my life for more than half of it, who knew me better than anyone, who'd waited patiently while I figured out what he'd known all along. I told him yes. It was real. He was real. This was the most real thing I'd ever felt. He kissed me then, not hesitantly, like before, but with certainty, with conviction, like he'd been waiting his entire life for permission to do this. And I kissed him back. I let myself fall into it, into him, into the truth I'd been running from for decades. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. He said he loved me. He said he'd always loved me. And I said it back, out loud. For the first time in my life, I said the words I'd been holding inside for 20 years. I love you. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, letting the weight of what we'd admitted settle around us. But eventually, I had to leave. Had to go back to my house. My wife. My other life. As I drove home, I felt something shift inside me. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I'd spoken a truth I couldn't unspeak. And I knew that whatever came next, I couldn't keep living in between. I couldn't keep one foot in each world. I had to choose. The question was whether I was brave enough to choose myself. I became a ghost in my own home. That's the only way I can describe it. I moved through the rooms, spoke when spoken to, performed the daily rituals of a life I no longer inhabited. But I wasn't really there. I was somewhere else entirely. Marissa noticed. Of course she did. I'd stopped trying to hide it. I couldn't anymore. She'd ask me questions, and I'd forget to answer. She'd tell me something about her day, and I'd realize 10 minutes later I hadn't heard a word. At dinner, I'd push food around my plate, barely eating, barely present. My son asked me once if I was sick. I told him I was fine, just tired. He looked at me like he didn't believe me, but he didn't push. Kids never do. They sense when their parents are fragile and they back away, protecting themselves from whatever's breaking. I kept writing in the notebook. Every night, after everyone went to sleep, I'd take it out and fill more pages. It became the only place I could be honest. The only place where I didn't have to pretend. I wrote, I am living two lives and neither of them is complete. In one, I am a husband and a father, a man who has built something stable and respectable. In the other, I am myself. Fully, terribly, honestly myself. And I don't know how to reconcile them. I don't know if I can. I wrote, Elias deserves more than stolen moments and whispered confessions. He deserves someone who can stand beside him in daylight, who can choose him without shame or hesitation. But I don't know if I can be that person. I don't know if I'm brave enough. I wrote, my children will hate me. Marissa will hate me. Everyone I know will look at me differently. The life I've built will collapse. And I will be responsible for all of it. The notebook filled up. I bought another one and filled that too. Words became my only outlet, the only way to process the impossible choice in front of me. One night, Marissa knocked on my study door. I was sitting at my desk, the notebook open in front of me. I closed it quickly, too quickly, and she noticed. She asked if we could talk. I said yes. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the one I usually piled with books and papers. She'd moved them to the floor. It felt deliberate, like she'd prepared for this. She said she knew something was wrong, that I'd been distant for weeks, that I barely looked at her anymore. She asked if I was having an affair. The question hung in the air between us. I could have lied, could have said no, and she might have believed me, might have let it go. But I was so tired of lying. I told her I didn't know how to answer that. Her face changed. The careful composure she always wore cracked, just for a moment. She asked me what that meant. I said it meant things were complicated, that I was trying to figure some things out. She stood up then. She said she deserved better than vague answers, that after 18 years, I owed her honesty. She was right. I did owe her that. I told her I'd met someone. That wasn't quite true, but it was close enough. I told her I had feelings for someone else, that I'd been struggling with those feelings, that I didn't know what to do about them. She asked who it was. If it was someone from work, someone she knew. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not like this. I said I didn't want to get into details, that I needed time to think. She laughed. It was a bitter sound, broken and sharp. She said I'd had plenty of time, that she'd been watching me disappear for months, that whatever I needed to figure out, I should do it quickly, because she wasn't going to sit around waiting while I decided whether our marriage was worth staying in. Then she left. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the bedroom door closing. Not slamming, just closing. Firmly. Finally, I sat in my study and stared at the wall. I'd hurt her. I'd known I would, eventually. But knowing didn't make it easier. Didn't make me feel less like I was destroying something that had mattered once. I called Elias. It was late, past midnight, but I knew he'd answer. He always did. He could hear it in my voice, that something had shifted. He asked what happened. I told him about the conversation with Marissa, about the way she'd looked at me, about the ultimatum she'd given me without saying the words directly. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that maybe it was time, that maybe I couldn't keep standing at the crossroads forever, that I had to choose a direction. I asked him if he knew what he was asking me to give up. my family, my children's respect, the life I'd spent decades building. He said he did, and that he wouldn't ask me to do it if he wasn't sure. Sure about us. Sure about what we could have together. Sure that I'd be happier living honestly than I'd ever been living a lie. I wanted to believe him, but I was terrified. He said I should come over, that we should talk in person, that I shouldn't be alone right now. I almost said yes. Almost got in my car and drove to him. But I couldn't. Not tonight. Not with Marissa upstairs, probably not sleeping, probably wondering what I was doing down here. I told him I'd see him tomorrow. He said okay. He said he loved me. I said it back, quiet enough that no one else could hear. After we hung up, I opened the notebook again. I wrote, I am standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind me is everything I've known. Everything safe and familiar. Ahead of me is free fall. No guarantee of where I'll land. No promise that I'll survive the fall. I wrote, but I can't keep standing here. The ground is crumbling beneath my feet. Eventually, I'll fall whether I choose to or not. The only question is whether I jump or whether I get pushed. The next morning, Marissa didn't speak to me. She moved through the kitchen like I wasn't there, making her coffee, gathering her things. When she left for work, she didn't say goodbye. The silence felt heavier than any argument would have. I went to see Elias that afternoon. I told him I needed to talk. We sat on his couch, the place where everything had started, and I told him everything. About the conversation with Marissa, about the notebook, about the fear that was eating me alive. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took both my hands in his. He said he understood I was scared, that this wasn't easy, that he wasn't asking me to choose lightly. But he also said he couldn't keep doing this. Couldn't keep waiting in the shadows while I tried to hold together a life that was already falling apart. He said he loved me, that he wanted a real relationship, not stolen hours and secret phone calls, not hidden feelings and careful lies. He wanted to be able to hold my hand in public, to introduce me as his partner, to build a life together without shame. He said I deserved that too, that I deserved to live openly, to love openly, to stop apologizing for who I was. And then he said something that broke me. He said if I couldn't do that, if I couldn't choose him, he would understand. But that he'd have to let me go, that he couldn't keep loving someone who couldn't fully love him back. It wasn't an ultimatum. Not exactly. It was just the truth. He'd waited 20 years. He couldn't wait forever. I sat there with his hands in mine, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. My marriage, my children, my reputation, my job, everything I'd be risking. But I also felt what I'd be gaining. Freedom, honesty, a chance to finally, fully be myself. I told him I needed a few days to talk to Marissa properly, to figure out what I was going to say to my children, to prepare for everything that would come after. He nodded. He said he'd be here, waiting, but not forever. I drove home in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about how many sunsets I'd watched from the window of my house, feeling nothing. How many years I'd spent going through the motions. I thought about the couch where Elias and I had sat, about the feeling of his hand on my face, about the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered, and I thought about what it would mean to choose that, to choose him, to choose myself. When I got home, Marissa was sitting in the living room. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. She asked me if I'd made a decision. I sat down across from her, not next to her. The distance between us felt infinite. I told her I thought we should talk, really talk, about everything. She nodded. She said she'd been waiting for this conversation for a long time, longer than I probably realized. And in that moment, I understood. She'd known. Maybe not the details. Maybe not about Elias specifically. But she'd known I wasn't fully present. That part of me had always been somewhere else. She deserved better than what I'd given her. And so did I. It was time to stop pretending. The conversation with Marissa lasted hours. We talked until our voices were raw, until there was nothing left to say. I told her things I'd never said out loud. About the years of pretending. About feeling like I was living someone else's life. About Elias. She cried. I cried. But there was also relief in it. Like we'd both been holding our breath for years and could finally exhale. She said she'd known something was missing. That she'd felt it from the beginning, but had convinced herself it would get better. That love would grow. That we'd figure it out. She said she'd been pretending to. She asked me why I married her if I knew. I told her the truth. That I didn't know. Not really. That I'd convinced myself I could be the person everyone needed me to be. That I'd thought wanting something different was just a phase. Something I could ignore until it went away. But it never went away. She asked me what I wanted now. I told her I wanted to be honest. To stop pretending. To live the life I should have been living all along. She said she understood. And I think she did. Not because she wanted to, but because after 18 years, she knew me well enough to see that I'd already made my choice. That I'd made it weeks ago, maybe years ago, and had just been too afraid to act on it. We talked about the children, about how to tell them, about what this would mean for them. She said they deserved the truth, that they deserved parents who were happy, even if that meant their parents weren't together. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. We lay in bed, not touching, staring at the ceiling. In the morning, we told the kids together. We sat them down in the living room and we explained, as gently as we could, that things were going to change. My daughter cried. My son got angry, stormed off to his room. I wanted to follow him, to explain, to make him understand. But Marissa stopped me. She said he needed time. They both did. She was right. Over the next few weeks, I moved out. Not far. Just to a small apartment across town. Close enough to see the kids regularly. Far enough to start over. The divorce was amicable, as much as divorce can be. We split everything fairly. She kept the house. I took what I needed and left the rest behind. My colleagues at work noticed. Parents at school events whispered. Some people stopped inviting me to things. Some people asked careful questions that I deflected. I lost friends. I lost the easy comfort of being normal. But I gained something too. Something I'd never had before. Freedom. I sit on my couch now. It's not the same couch. That one stayed with the house, with Marissa, with the life I left behind. This one is new. Smaller. Secondhand. But it's mine. On the coffee table in front of me sit 2 wedding rings. Mine and Marissa's. She gave hers back to me the day the divorce was finalized. She said she didn't need it anymore. That we'd both carried them long enough. I keep them there to remind myself. Of what I had. Of what I gave up. Of what it cost to choose myself. The apartment is quiet. I've gotten used to the silence. It doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels like possibility. I look at the space beside me on the couch. Empty now, but not for long. Elias is coming over tonight. He does that now. Comes over without pretense. Without hiding. He has a key. His toothbrush sits in my bathroom. His coffee mug is in my cabinet. We're building something. Slowly. Carefully. Something real. My children are adjusting. It's not easy. My son still barely speaks to me. My daughter asks questions I don't always know how to answer. But they're young. They'll understand, eventually. Or maybe they won't. Maybe this is something they'll carry with them. Maybe I've damaged them in ways I can't fix. I have to believe it was still worth it. That living honestly, even when it's hard, is better than living a lie. I hear a car door close outside. Footsteps on the stairs. A key in the lock. The door opens and Elias walks in. He's wearing his scrubs, his hair messy from a long shift. He looks tired. But when he sees me, he smiles. That soft, unguarded smile that's just for me. He asks how my day was. I tell him about my classes, about the student who finally turned in that overdue essay. He tells me about the hospital, about a patient who made him laugh. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of conversation 2 people have when they're building a life together. He sits down beside me on the couch. Close. Our knees touching. His hand finds mine. This is what I chose. This quiet, steady closeness. This feeling of being seen and known and loved for who I actually am. It's not perfect. There are hard days. Days when I miss my children. Days when I wonder if I made the right choice. Days when the weight of what I gave up feels crushing. But then Elias leans his head on my shoulder. And I remember why I did this. Why I finally stopped running. The light from the window catches on the wedding rings on the coffee table. Relics of a former life. I should probably put them away. But I keep them out. A reminder of where I've been. Of how far I've come. Elias asks what I'm thinking about. I tell him everything. Nothing. The past. The future. Us. He squeezes my hand. He says we have time. that we don't have to figure it all out tonight. He's right. We have time now. Time I didn't have before. Time to be honest. Time to love openly. Time to finally, fully live. I look at him. At this man who waited for me. Who loved me even when I couldn't love myself. Who gave me permission to be who I always was. And I realized something. I'm not standing at the edge anymore. I jumped. And I survived the fall. The couch holds both of us now. No more pretending. No more hiding. Just two people who found each other 20 years ago and finally found the courage to choose what they wanted. The sun is setting outside. The apartment is quiet. And for the first time in my life, I am home.